welcome everybody to another episode of Compliance Clips. I'm Rick Morgan, your host, along with John Farquhar. We're going to take you through the intricacies of transportation risk management, compliance, and safety. We share input from experts to help you deliver best practices where you work. In today's installment, we continue our conversation with Heather Devine on carrier confirmation sheets. We dig deep into the paperwork pitfalls of load brokering. If you missed part 1, we really recommend you go back now and watch episode 9 to ensure you're fully in the loop, because we're going to get into some nitty gritties here. But let me tell you, this is really powerful information here. Our focus takes us today into the real world scenario where a broker faced a substantial transportation claim without recourse for recovery from the responsible carrier. The implications are significant, especially if you accept loads from other carriers, you tender loads to other carriers, you operate as a 3PL, or you're involved in logistics and even shipping. So without further delay, let's get into it.
So are we able to, when we offer the load through the various load boards, make a comment or insert a term that says, be advised this load is subject to specific terms and conditions, which are available for you, and then we would have a link on our webpage, or we supply them at the time that we send the carrier confirmation sheet?
You can do it by any of the ways that you've just listed, because those are practices in our industry that we deal with. I think the most important point is, one, you want to be consistent so that you, with your own operations as a broker, understand exactly how you are communicating with carriers. So if you're going to be putting it as part of your load board terms, it's always on the load board terms, so it's upfront and set out. And if you're going to be putting it in your carrier confirmation form, then you educate your people to say, when you send the carrier confirmation form, that is in and of itself is the offer. So any other discussions that you've had before either have to be in the carrier confirmation form, or if you have additional ones, you want to bring it to the attention of the carrier. And by golly geez, if you're going to use a carrier confirmation form that requires the carrier to put its signature and a date and then send it back to you, you got to do it. Mm-hmm. So you know what? I would flip that on its head and say, look, let's make life so much easier for the people that are working in this industry, and let's make it easier for them to do it exactly. I call it tickety-boo. Don't put the signature in the carrier confirmation form that requires an actual signature, an electric signature, and then a return. That's so old-fashioned. That's like from the days of faxing. Put a click accept. Use DocuSign, and then keep track that you got it back. Nothing wrong with fax. It's just nobody has a fax. Nobody faxes anymore. No. Right? So guys, like, if you're going to put people out there and you're going to say, look, you have to do the offer and then you have to do the acceptance, you got to make it easy for them. So I'm not critical of the broker in the case, because I'm sure that made sense. But I'm saying, now that we know this, and we're talking about this on such great programs like Compliance Clips, let's say, what can we do to shake up the industry to make it super easy? Look, we can click yes to terms and conditions with our banks. Yeah. So why can't we click yes to terms and conditions for carriage of freight?
Well, and I think one thing that comes to mind here with what you're saying, we also need to have a set of procedures in place as to how we're going to manage this flow of documentation. Because one of the things in my career that I've seen when I visit lots of different carriers and whatnot is, who's responsible for actually signing? Let me back up. Who's responsible for reviewing, reading, and then signing the acknowledgement on that broker carrier contract? Sometimes it's just dispatch that goes, it's 4:00 on a Friday. We need this load. I'm just going to sign it and away we go. But nobody ever read the document to find out what they're being bound and held for all of a sudden.
John, you're so right. And I think what you need to do is set up a system where the document comes in and someone is, parsing it or summarizing it bullet by bullet to say, here's what we're agreeing to on this. And then you get the operational side to actually commit and agree. So I think that's a very good point. And you can't just have someone sign it because they want the business. That can be deadly.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, you're better off to lose the load than take the chance of being, involved with a much higher loss. with the cargo, or something goes wrong or something happens over the weekend with it, whereas I would have been cheaper to run him home empty if that were the case. So
It's so true. It's
yeah.
so true.
So,
and we didn't talk about fatalities and nuclear verdicts, and I know that's a different topic, but you can walk yourself into a situation in the United States that's a bet your company case. And yes, you want to think about these things for sure.
Right.
So this conversation is a great segue for where one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Heather, is I think one of the challenges and one of the things that we become aware of after we've been in this business for a while, and we do the brokering of loads, and we're asking for the certificate of insurance and your operating authorities, is just because a carrier submits a certificate of insurance, it doesn't necessarily mean that certificate of insurance is going to be able to respond to all the claims that we might be contemplating. And I think this one here is a great example of that. I don't think most insurance policies are going to respond to a loss of quota, are they?
I don't think so either. And unless you specifically go out perhaps and get something like shipper's interest insurance or something else. But I think the best advice I would give on dealing with a certificate of insurance is really understand what the certificate insurance means. And in fact, it doesn't mean anything more than the piece of paper you get digitally, unless you actually go behind the COI. And let me say a few things. So some things I look at, particularly in the United States, is I look to see not only what kind of insurance coverage we're talking about, but I also look to see who the insurer is. Because in my job as legal, I now track any cargo claims that traffics may have. And I've noticed a certain trend, and I speak to a lot of other general counsel. We notice a trend in insurance companies that are not stepping up for a number of different reasons. And so I'm certainly not going to mention them on your show and actually end up with a defamation or a slander. But I can tell you, if you start to track and talk to the people, so I always want to say, who's the insurance carrier? Some are better than others. And then you look at the limits of insurance, make sure they match your broker-shipper agreement. And then I look for exclusions. And sometimes the items like frozen chicken are excluded. Liquor is another one that will be excluded. And then what I'll do, depending on how much time there is and depending on what's going on, then you can ask the carrier to send the broker-carrier agreement to its insurance broker. Then you get the insurance broker to write back by an email, CC to you, confirming that the carrier has in place current insurance with no exclusions for that agreement. That's platinum. That's like A1.
Well, I was going to say, in my years of working with insurance companies, no cargo policy is the same with every insurance carrier. Every one is going to be slightly different. There are going to be some that specialize in other types of commodities versus others. But one of the things that we were always adamant about on the insurance side was, as the customer or the broker in this case, or shipper, if it's a direct connection, is you can't 100% rely on the COI, the certificate of insurance. Just because it says he has $250,000 in coverage doesn't mean the insurance company is going to pay $250,000 in coverage unless we have all this documentation in place, your carrier confirmation, your bills of ladings that specify what the declared value of the goods are. If that's never declared, and we're, say, moving a shipment from point A to point A in Ontario, the insurance company is going to go, you never told me it was that much money. Guess what? We're just going to give you $2 per pound. And
so
now
right,
all of a
John.
sudden, now you've got a bigger problem on your hands, right, Heather?
Yep. I mean, that it's very scary, because at least, the one thing, it's like lawyers, we have insurance. And I used to say to the junior lawyers when we dealt with really large cases, I used to say, this is what allows us to sleep at night. We act within our limits of our insurance, and sometimes things go wrong. But if you end up in a cargo claim without insurance, or worse, even perhaps a fatality claim without insurance, what do you face? Potential loss of the customer, loss of profit in this tough economy. So I agree with you, John. It's worth your while to learn from someone like you, because insurance is not my specialty. And in fact, I have a VP risk management and enterprise at Trafix, and that's what he does. He is our insurance guru.
Yep.
And, I don't do a thing without asking if we have the insurance in our program, just for that verification. I agree with you, John. You're completely right.
Cool.
So this conversation has been great because, once again, it's a segue to my next question. We always think that, as the operations or the guys that are in there, it's like, okay, we got an ugly one. It's gone sideways. It's gone pear-shaped. Time to bounce it up. And we're going to reach out to our insurer, or we're going to reach out to our lawyer, and we're going to say, okay, we're out X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars paying for this particular issue arising from the carrier's actions. Sue them. And in reading your article, the broker had no standing to sue, if I remember correctly, in this case. And I'm hoping that you can explain what exactly that means and looks like to a carrier or logistics company where they're in the situation that this organization found themselves, and they go to the courts, and the courts say, no, we're not even going to hear you.
Yep, that's exactly what happened. Good question. Let me give you an example, because it's the one I got when I was in law school. So when you don't have standing to bring a claim, and here's where I promised you guys I'd talk Latin to you, then that means you don't have the in personam right to pursue a claim. So in personam is the Latin meaning. I always think of it as in person right. So let's say you use a car accident as an example, and someone is in, let's make it a low value, not stressful, a fender bender. So someone is in a fender bender in your family, and you say, you know what, I'm going to go to court and sue for you. I wasn't in the car at the time, and I didn't see the accident, but it's going to be a lot less stressful for you if I go to court. Well, you can't do it because you don't have standing. You weren't in the car. You aren't the person who had the damages. You're not the car owner. You're just someone who has an interest. That's exactly what happened in this case when it was found that the broker didn't have standing. So they couldn't commence the litigation and claim damages for breach of contract or a tort because the court found that the damages actually belonged to the shipper, and the shipper had been made whole. And so you cannot step into the shoes of your customer and sue on their behalf without an assignment of their rights to their in personam claim. It's very old law, more prominent in Canada and England than the United States, and the concepts of law are champerty and maintenance. And champerty is where you step into the shoes of another to sue, and maintenance is where you pay someone else to have the court case to sue for them. Let's say they say, I have a right to, to damages, and you say, well, I'll pay for you to take that matter to court. There's very specific circumstances where that can occur. So sadly, what happened here, and, I'd love to know behind the scenes why, and of course, we'll probably never know, but the customer didn't give a right of assignment to the broker. You can't do it retroactively. So I always look for it in that shipper-broker agreement. I like to look for assignment rights. But I'll tell you, the one big thing that surprised me when I came in-house, a lot of shippers kind of push back on assignment rights, which I don't understand because they still want the broker to go through, of course, and make the cargo claim for them and collect from the carrier. So you either get it in your agreement or you are very careful to say to your customer, when they tell you there's been a loss, you say, I need an assignment now. You want me to go after the carrier and take care of this? I will, but I need an assignment. For whatever reason in this case, the broker didn't get an assignment. So the court said, yeah, you don't have standing. That payment you made to your customer was a voluntary payment, and your case is dismissed.
Interesting.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep.
So, John, I know you and I had been talking about this conversation with Heather in advance, and you had a couple of questions that you'd highlighted that you want to ask her. One of them revolving around, I believe, who is drawing up this contract?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I guess let me ask this question. In this case in particular, I'm just curious, was there a broker carrier agreement in place at all?
I don't have the details of that, and
Okay.
I tend to think there may not have been, because somehow the concept of assignment got overlooked.
Right.
And
Right.
so it would make a lot of sense if this was a relationship between the shipper and the broker, where
Right.
they had been perhaps moving goods for this customer on a long-term basis.
Right. Right. So with regards to that agreement that should be in place, if it's not, it needs to be, obviously, um, whether it be a contract between the motor carrier transporting the goods and the broker that they're hauling for, and also with regards to the carrier confirmation sheet that comes across with the load details and information, and hopefully a cargo value and some other details. Are these documents that the carrier could just create on their own, or is this something where they should be seeking legal counsel?
That's a great question. So look, let's be practical. There are some really, really smart people in this industry who are savvy. I think if they choose not to use a lawyer, then they can do it on their own, but they need to make sure they're reading articles, they're listening to podcasts like yourself, and they become educated on this concept of offer and acceptance and what should be in the carrier confirmation form. But, I do think it's worth the money of having a very good transportation lawyer. There's quite a few in Canada and the United States. And you can even say, I did this myself. Can you review it for me? That would be the least expensive way. And frankly,
Sure.
it's then on the lawyer's insurance for that that warranty by the lawyer that, yes, you're compliant with the laws at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was going to say it. One thing I don't think we should be relying on is, hey, my buddy's got a contract, and he's loaned it to me. He says I could use it, because I think we all love that opportunity. Is there anything specific that should be in that, say, that carrier confirmation sheet, if we're going to utilize that? Is there anything in there specific with regards to the shipment itself, whether it be pickup times, delivery times, when, like the temperature we talked about in this particular case, or if there's a crane appointment at the other end or anything like that? Is that details that should be in that confirmation, or is some of that stuff that should that be in the contract?
Well, John, you hit the nail on the head. So I think that so sometimes how it's structured, it could be both. A typical lawyer, when they say maybe, and then they charge you more because they get to keep talking. But here we're free. But if you're going to have it in the contract, that seems to me like some very, very precise details that wouldn't be in the contract. I think what the contract in that case would say would be, there will be carrier confirmation forms that do not change liability or our arrangement of damages, but they will set out the precise terms for the movement of the particular load. That would make a lot of sense. Then everybody goes, okay, we know our limitation of liability is $2 per pound, unless we agree in writing ahead of time otherwise.
Right.
And the carrier confirmation form just becomes something that goes to operations with all the details that are required. So, you do understand where you're going and what kind of equipment you need to show up with. But John, you actually, I think in a way, maybe you were just having fun or maybe you were testing me, but when you mentioned the crane, we all know that if you're doing a delivery that has to be coordinated with a crane, that the crane operator, depending on, size, may have to be a union member. There's a lot of money per hour for a crane. So what I would have put in the agreement would be, it is understood between the parties that some of the deliveries may affect third parties, such as cranes, and damages for delay more than 2 hours will be paid for by the carrier in full. That's fair. And then the carrier's supposed to go, whoa, we got one here, Fred, we've got to be there on time. We have a 2-hour window, or the crane is waiting and we got to start paying.
Yep. I threw that in because I actually had that situation years ago with my own trucking company. And we had that written in a load confirmation with a carrier. It was a local move, sadly enough, and he was 6 hours late. It only took him an hour to get from one side of the city to the other, but he was 6 hours late getting there to get it loaded and then bringing it over to the other side. And then he didn't even provide the right equipment. It was a certain size, certain weight. He violated his own permits that he got. He didn't have enough axles for the load, and we were very upset because there was concerns that the piece had been damaged. Then it was late, so yeah, there was all kinds of back charges back to that carrier, and they were a little pissy with me because I deducted that from the payment, and they're like, "You can't do that." And I said, "Well, but you might want to read the carrier confirmation we provided that had all the details of when you had to be there and how many axles you were going to provide, and you did not." So
Yeah, I agree.
But,
And all of that heartache could have been avoided perhaps by upfront contracting.
Yeah, and I think that's a scenario that in the automotive and just-in-time world, a lot of carriers find themselves surprised with when something goes sideways, and all of a sudden we've got to do the recovery at cost. So another thing to consider in our terms.
Exactly.
Okay, well, this has been an incredibly insightful and engaging conversation. I can't thank you enough for joining us. Before we
Yes, thank
sign
you.
off, what little gems would you like to leave us with to advise our carriers and our listeners and our logistics providers? Folks, if you don't want to find yourself in a situation of this carrier's particular pain, what would you suggest? 2 or 3 just takeaways for the audience.
All right. I wrote out a few, and I'll pick my best ones. If you have a signature line but no signature, then you have nothing. Okay. Industry practice can vary all the time. So have regular reviews of your practices and your contracts with a good transportation lawyer to make sure they're tickety-boo.
Cool.
And then I guess the third would be get an assignment from your customer. It's your ticket to play.
Cool.
Good.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I definitely liked what you were saying about the, just click the button to accept, simplify the process.
Yes.
So, and with technology today, Rick can do that through Google. I know he's awesome with Google. So Rick's just awesome, period. So.
I agree.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to hang up the recording because you're making me blush. But no, this has actually been awesome.
Yes. Thank you very much.
you.
Appreciate it.